Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. And I'm Mark Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us to stay curious. Today, on March 26, 2025, we've got a good friend of the museum that does a monthly program on Stay Curious, Bob Granath. Bob,
Yeah,
greetings to you, sir. Bob was a
glad to be
public.
here.
How many years were you in PR with Lockheed and
United Space
USA?
Alliance, and then working out the press side. I was out there 35 years, and
Yeah.
since retirement, I've been doing volunteer work out there, and so had an association with Kennedy Space Center for more than 40 years now.
Bob, we didn't rack up your slide, but you do have forgot to do that. You're always welcome to put your promotional slide up there. You have a website that has a
That's
lot of
right,
history on it,
spaceagechronicle.com.
spaceagechronicle.com. And so you want to check that out. And our show today is going to be in tune with the theme of March, women in history, and particularly NASA history. The arrow points to Joanne Morgan,
That's right.
who we're going to have an evening with Joanne Morgan on Friday, April 11th, to kick off Shuttle Fest, and
Super.
it's gonna be mega. I'm going to tell you, it's going to be something else. I think all four of our astronauts that are committed to Shuttle Fest will be here doing autographs. There's only about 21 slots of the 125 left, so go to our website and download that. Shuttle Fest, right here's my Shuttle Fest slide. Uh, Joanne Morgan will be kicking it off for Eileen Collins, Don Thomas, Joe Tanner, and John Grunsfeld is right over your corner there. And I talked to Eileen Collins last night, and we sent some emails back and forth. I guess you say you talk to people like that now,
Right.
email. She's so excited to come, Bob. She's really a people person and loves
Oh,
being around people. And
it absolutely is. I really enjoyed meeting her. At the time that I met her, I was still working for Lockheed. And I was talking to her about the fact that I learned that she had been flying the Lockheed C-141 when she was in the Air Force. And she said, "Oh, well, yeah, I know it's a big transport plane. You know, the space shuttle's a big transport plane." And she's sort of like, "Oh, I fly the space shuttle." And I'm thinking, that's a big spacecraft you're
yeah.
flying there. And she was just so down to earth and humble about it, and just
Yeah.
a fascinating individual to talk
Oh,
to.
and her documentary is amazing. We're not going to be showing her documentary, but she's anxious to come and she'll be here the whole event. And we're going to feature her Sunday afternoon. It'll be like Eileen Collins afternoon
Okay.
with launch director Mike Leinbach
Oh,
and
that's great.
Jonathan Ward talking
Yeah,
about their respective books. So
very good.
but we're not here to talk much about Shuttle Fest. It's going to sell out, and if you're not there, Dave Stange, you'll miss out. He's with his granddaughter Mia today up in Michigan. Hi, Mia, and so she's 2 years old. So we
Ah,
want to
okay.
encourage them up there as much as we
Oh,
can.
great.
So celebrating Women's Month of March, like we do at the American Space Museum, with oh, wait, where am I going back here? Let me slow down there, Mark. Let's go to the full there. You can't be what you don't see, says Sally Ride. I think that says it all. You can't be what you don't see.
Yeah, that's important. It's young women need to see other women doing things that they dream of doing. And when a young woman sees Sally Ride as an astronaut, or some of the other women who are serving as astronauts now, they say, "Hey, I can do that."
So here's some of our astronaut females there. You know a lot of them. All of them have been to space. It's just there's Sunny Williams there in the lower
Oh
right
yeah.
hand corner in there. So Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you. You tell me when to advance the slides there,
Okay.
and we're going to kick it off with this lady here.
All right. That's right. That's Cecilia Bibby. She went by Cece, but she was an illustrator with Chrysler. That Chrysler Aerospace, that was one of the big contractors at Cape Canaveral back in the early 1960s. And you can go up to the next slide there, and you'll see the Mercury capsule that Al Shepard flew, named Freedom 7, and Gus Grissom's Liberty Bell 7. And the way they got the names painted on those spacecraft is they simply had one of the mechanics that worked up on top of the launch pad cut a stencil and spray painted the names on there. When John Glenn was getting ready for the first orbital flight by an American, he asked that someone developed a nice script. And so the boss with the Chrysler company said, okay, I have some illustrators. And he said, women have the best penmanship. So he asked Cecilia Bibby, come up with a design. She created this sign you see here with Friendship 7 printed on it, just the way it would go on the side of his capsule. And so he's right here looking at it and seeing what it would look like. He really liked the design. And so he said, well, I want the illustrator who designed this to be the one who actually painted on there. And when he brought that design back and gave it to her, she said her boss was not really happy. And it was after a conversation that went like this. So Glenn says to the guy with Chrysler, I want the person who designed this to paint it on by hand. Well, that's a woman. So, well, she'd have to go on the launch pad and up on the gantry. Is she handicapped in some way? Well, she's a woman. Is she afraid of heights? I don't know, but she's a woman. Why don't you find out from her whether she has some objection to go up on top of the gantry? Well, I could have a stencil cut and have one of the guys spray painted on the capsule. And this is when John Glenn got angry. He said, I don't want to stencil a can of spray paint. I want the artist to hand paint this design on there for me. Go ask her about it. So he went back to her and said, okay, you're going to go up on the gantry. All right. That's when she wound up with the next objection. When she arrived up on the, keep going. Arrived up on the gantry, she met Gunther Wendt, who you see here with John Glenn. He was known as the pad leader. He was the boss at the pad, made sure everything ran smoothly. The astronauts loved him because he was quite a character, always was coming up with gags to give astronauts when they're getting ready to get in their spacecraft for one of the missions through Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. And I met him along the way a number of times, and he's just a real fun guy to get to know. But at this point, he was used to only men going up on top of that gantry. So when Cecilia got up there, he said, this is for men only. Women are not allowed up here. And she said, well, you better take that up with John Glenn because he wants me to paint this on. And so she went in, made the needed measurements, and within a few days, she was painting it on. You can go on to the next slide and you can see her hard at work, actually painting the name right on the side of the capsule. And then once it was on there, you can go on to the next one. You can see John Glenn was pretty happy with that design. It was a nice script, looked real good. It was colorful. And so that was the name that was painted on there when John Glenn was launched on February the 20th, 1962. And it just happened to be Cecilia's 34th birthday.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. So the other astronauts saw that design. And so when Scott Carpenter was getting ready to fly his mission, you can go on to the next one. You can see here she is painting on Scott Carpenter's chosen name of Aurora 7. And then the one after that, you can see Wally Schirra had her paint Sigma 7 on the side of his spacecraft. And you can switch over to the next slide.
Just, was it like a good luck thing? They thought a woman was bad luck, or just the sexism of the time, Bob?
I think it was just the sexism of the time. There were only men working up there. They weren't used to seeing women on the pad. And so a woman coming up there was just something they weren't used to at all. And so, Gunther Wendt considered this as a man's domain. What are you doing up here? And so, she was very nonchalant. She said, well, take it up with John Glenn. And so she said, well, if she wants it, then, go ahead.
A real fascinating person, another hidden figure of this space.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And
of course, in this image, you see what happened was she took a job out in California, and she was out there when Gordon Cooper flew. And so someone else painted the Faith 7 logo on the side of his capsule. But in years after her retirement, she'd come back to Cape Canaveral and sign autographs. She'd create little signs with the designs of Friendship 7, Aurora 7, and Sigma 7. And she'd autograph those and pose for picture with some of the astronauts who were the beneficiaries of her artwork. And what had happened is after she returned to Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center, she worked for a number of years and then married a U.S. Navy officer. And they say join the Navy and see the world. She traveled around the world. Then they eventually, after he retired, they settled in Blue Ridge, Georgia, up in North Georgia, the city that my wife and I visited this past fall. It's a very nice town, a good place to visit, good place to vacation. But that's where she retired. But then after that, she would come back to um, Cape Canaveral and events at Cocoa Beach to attend some of these autograph shows and reunions with some of the Mercury astronauts.
CC Bibby, Bibby, Cecilia Bibby. Is she still alive?
She passed away a few years ago. I think she was 84 at the time that she passed.
Well, quite a legend there. She and quite a cool picture there
Oh,
with,
yeah.
of course, Gordon Cooper, and to the left, and Scott Carpenter and Wally Schirra, and all of those heroes of ours are gone now.
Oh,
In fact, we just celebrated Jim Lovell's 97th birthday,
that's right.
the oldest space flyer on Earth right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, who else we have next up?
All right. Well, next up is a lady named Judy Sullivan. She was one of the first engineers at Kennedy Space Center. Cecilia Bibby was an illustrator. Judy Sullivan was actually an engineer, a biomedical engineer, and you see her, she's out at the launch pad just before the Apollo 11 first moon landing mission. And at that particular time in the 1960s, the late 60s, about 17% of the staff at the Kennedy Space Center were women. Of that 5,500 women, 4,000 were secretaries. So there weren't that many in engineering, and she was one of the few. But at the time of Apollo 11, she was 26 years old. And as you can see in the next slide up, she was a biomedical engineer. As you know, during the early space program, they would have sensors all over the astronauts' bodies so that flight surgeons back on the ground could track things like respiration, body temperature, heartbeat, and all that, just to see how humans perform and react to the microgravity of space. And so when they were doing simulations, for example, in leading up to Apollo 11, there were simulations in the crew quarters building, the operations and checkout building, known as the Manned Spacecraft Operations Building back in the Apollo era. She would monitor the astronauts' heartbeat and breathing and all of that from a console you see in that picture.
Judy Sullivan.
Judy Sullivan.
Nice hairdo there, Judy.
Yeah.
That was the style of the day.
Oh, yeah. That definitely says the late 1960s.
Yeah.
But at any rate, as the astronauts were getting suited up on launch day for Apollo 11, she was in the room. And in the next slide, you'll see she was actually at a console where she was monitoring heartbeat and all of that as the astronauts were being suited up. Here in the foreground, you can see Neil Armstrong being briefed by Deke Slayton, who was the chief astronaut at the time, but she was keeping tabs of how the astronauts were doing health-wise as they were getting into their spacesuits. And one of the notes on this is she was the only woman in the suit-up room during the time the astronauts were getting prepared to head out to the launch pad on launch day.
Interesting, interesting.
But here's a close-up. She's watching what the data is showing and making notes. In fact, at one point she writes gloves on. So you see exactly what the heartbeat was when the astronaut put the gloves on.
Huh.
So that was some of the work that she was doing in the suit-up room. But what I'm told is that she was very well accepted in a mostly male environment. And in fact, they liked her so well, if somebody had a question, they'd say, go ask that guy. And as the next slide will show, it was a reference to that TV show, That Girl, that starred Marlo Thomas. It was very popular at the time. And so Marlo Thomas was that girl. So if somebody needed to talk to Judy Sullivan, they'd say, go talk to that guy. She was pretty well accepted. Now, the interesting thing is, that's a reference to a TV show. She actually did appear on television. In September, a few months after the Apollo 11 moon landing mission, she appeared on that TV game show To Tell the Truth.
Okay.
They thought it was very unusual to have a young lady engineer. And so they had three women who appeared on this show, and they had them lined up. And those of us who are old enough to remember that show, you'd have a woman stand, "My name is Judy Sullivan." Go to the next one. "My name is Judy Sullivan. My name is Judy Sullivan." And then the narrator would say she was one of the only woman engineers working the preparation to launch the first moon landing mission. And so they sit at a panel, and there's a panel of celebrities who ask them questions to see if they can figure out which one is the real Judy Sullivan. She said, "They dressed me up in a mini skirt, made me look like I was 16-year-old. We stumped the panel." And as a result, she not only had a chance to tour New York City, she won $500 by stumping the
There you
panel.
go.
And in fact, I looked it up. $500 then would be worth $4,300 today.
That's a nice spending spree for New York for her there.
Yeah, that was pretty
Judy
good.
Sullivan, did not know anything about her. Wonderful. Here we're talking with Bob Granath. Bob, new friend of the museum. He's does once a month a beautiful show like this for you out there to learn more about our history of our wonderful American space program and some of these little idiosyncrasies like the women of space we're celebrating here at the end of March. Next up,
Now,
Bob.
to show how things have changed, around 2021, women made up about 34% of the workforce at the Kennedy Space Center. So it's expanding, but we're hoping that that will continue to grow. Now, the next up, that's a picture of Judy Sullivan that was taken in 2009. She was 66 years old when that picture was taken.
My, okay. Certainly he's aged well there.
Oh, yeah.
Eating right, so forth. All right.
All right. Well, next, also staying in the Apollo 11 era, this is a group of men who will be working the Launch Control Center, going through a meeting in the weeks leading up to the first moon landing mission. And the era is pointing to Joanne Morgan. She was not only a woman engineer, she was the only woman engineer in the firing room on launch day. There were some other women there, but they were all secretaries. And her story is, she said, you have to realize that everywhere I went, if I went to a procedure review, if I went to a post-test critique, almost every single part of my daily work, I'd be the only woman in the room. And she said, I had a sense of loneliness in a way, but on the other side of the coin, I wanted to do the best job I could do. And so when her bosses decided she would be the best person to be staffing her console, on the launch processing system, they decided she should be the one on the console, but her boss had to go to the center director, Dr. Kurt Debus, and get permission. If she's the best, he said, then she should be the one in there. So he was fully supportive, even though it was still kind of raising some eyebrows at the time. Fact is,
Kurt Debus, very pro women to the beginning.
Yeah.
His secretary, Billy. You ever heard about Billy,
yes,
his secretary? Yes. They were having a meeting, and his secretary Billy was there, and they said, "Well, she's got to leave the meeting." And Debus said, "Why?" "Well, everyone knows a woman can't keep a secret." And Debus says, "She's staying here in the room." Okay, Billy's told that story at some things I've been at there. But so yeah, he was very pro women in the beginning, and
he certainly was.
And that was some outside the box thinking back in the 60s.
Oh yeah,
for
it
sure.
definitely was. And so the boss decided we better get permission. And of course, when it was presented to Dr. Debus, he said, "Sure, if she's the best, she's the one I want in that slot."
And you shuttle festers are going to get to meet Joanne Morgan, as we're going to feature an evening with her Friday at our museum on April 11th. I'm excited about that, as is Joanne.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to that because as I got
There's
to know
a
her.
picture where she is.
Oh yeah, that points to where she was in the firing room. You see that she's in a sea of other women there.
Men.
Right after the launch itself. What I learned, and when I met her, is that she grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and her dad had worked at Redstone Arsenal during World War II. Eventually, as he became a part of the Army Ballistic Missile Agency under Werner von Braun and Kurt Debus, as they began to shift these people more and more to Cape Canaveral, he moved to the Cape. And so they lived in Titusville. And so she grew up in Titusville and then started doing some work at the Cape. She went back to school and got a degree in engineering at Jacksonville State University, a degree in mathematics, and then came back and began working for the Army Ballistic Missile Agency, and with a lot of others transferred to NASA when they made that transition after the space agency was formed. And so what she says is, I was assigned to the missile firing laboratory at Cape Canaveral, and Dr. Debus, among others, helped shape my early career and was something of a mentor to her. So she already knew Dr. Debus, and so she definitely had his faith as she went on. Now, as things went on, she worked in the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Skylab, and Apollo Soyuz missions. She became very high up in management during the space shuttle program. And during her 45 year at Kennedy, she was director of safety and mission assurance, where she was responsible for the overall safety, reliability, maintainability, quality, and mission assurance. And in May 2000, she was named Director of External Relations and Business Development. And when she retired in 2003, the center director at that time, Roy Bridges, said, she is a pioneer for all female engineers at NASA. She has a passion for excellence and it's rarely exceeded. She thinks outside the box and makes things happen. So she was something highly respected at the highest levels of the Kennedy Space Center. And as you say, even now, she supports the work of the museum. And when I was here back in December for my first appearance on Stay Curious, you got this picture of us. And so it was great to have a chance to visit with her again. And one of the things we talked about that day, you'll recall, is she asked me one time, how did I get interested in the space program? And I said, well, I was inspired by Wernher von Braun. And she said, well, so was I. And so we have very much in common in that we both have a passion for what we do here in the space business.
I can't wait for you to see her again at Shuttle Fest. Her job as the safety person on the shuttle, she said, was the most nerve-wracking.
Oh, yeah.
She was actually number 2 behind the launch director for
Yeah.
launching or not, and a lot of big responsibility there.
Yeah, that was.
And we love you, Joanne Morgan, and we hope that you've got many more years ahead of you. She's so sharp right now, and
Oh, yeah.
she actually came in here, and we sat her down last week. She came in here for something, Marty. I know we were going to go over her talk and so forth, and I knew we'd be maybe doing a Stay Curious. I said, come on, sit down here, Joanne, and talk a little bit about us. We had a good conversation with her. She's grew up in World War II and had some cool stories about that. All right, Bob, next up.
Well, in 1978, as NASA was beginning to get ready for the space shuttle program, they selected a group of 35 astronauts. And this one not only had pilots, astronauts, this one had a lot of scientists, engineers, medical doctors, all kinds of backgrounds. It was also the first group to have ethnic minorities and women included. And of course, with that were the first 6 women astronauts. By the way, they called themselves the 35 New Guys, and their slogan was, "We Deliver." And when they had a reunion in 2008, associated with the shuttle launch that month, they had on shirts that said, "We delivered." And indeed they did. And they were very proud of the work they did. Well, at any rate, the next slide up shows the first 6 women astronauts: Shannon Lucid, Ray Seddon, Kathy Sullivan, Judy Resnick, Anna Fisher, and Sally Ride. And so once they were all selected, then people started guessing who's going to be the first woman in space, first American woman in space. But as they began training, we began preparing for the space shuttle. They began to show the American public how things were going to be different in the space shuttle, because a much larger spacecraft, something where you could carry up a payload the size of a school bus. So the next slide, you see a picture that actually turned out to be a little bit infamous. This is a picture of Ray Seddon demonstrating that rather than eating from squeeze tubes, as they did in Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, we'd actually have a tray with food, much like you'd have on an airliner. So people looked at this picture and see a young woman holding a tray of food and saying, oh, that's why they just selected women astronauts. They're going to be flight attendants. No, Ray is a medical doctor and a very highly regarded doctor. And so they, after a while, they stopped using this picture because people looked at it and they got completely confused about what the role of the astronaut's going to be. Well, then you start looking for who is going to be that first American woman in space. And in the next slide, you see a young lady who went to Stanford University. She got a bachelor's degree in physics, another bachelor's degree in English literature, and then she went on to get a master's in physics and a doctor's in physics. And her doctorate was written on the interaction of X-rays with the interstellar medium. And I read that and I say, this is a pretty smart individual. But you see her here with a tennis racket. She played tennis at Stanford and she was good. And one of the greatest women tennis players ever, Billie Jean King, saw her play once and said, you need to quit school and become a professional tennis player. She was that good.
Wow.
And so what this tells me is when they select these women, they get some of the brightest, most talented people. And so very shortly after becoming an astronaut and starting to fly space shuttle missions, Sally Ride became a spacecraft communicator during STS-2 and 3. And so at that role, the CAPCOM, as we call it, short for capsule communicator, is the person who talks directly to the astronauts. Early in the space program, decided rather than having all these different people in mission control talking directly to the astronauts where it could get very confusing, all the communication would go through one person, the CAPCOM. And so during that mission, or those two missions, she would be the person relaying information to the astronauts on board. And since she was first to be selected as a CAPCOM out of this group, among the group of women, the betting was that she would be the first American woman in space. And then when the crew for STS-7 was selected, then she was a part of that crew and ready to become the first American woman in space. Now, what happened is even the news media had trouble figuring out how to deal with an American woman flying in space. And so when this crew was initially introduced to the news media, one of the first questions she was asked was, Sally, when things don't go well, do you weep in frustration?
Oh,
and she laughed and said, why don't they ask Rick that question, referring to Rick Houck, who was going to be the pilot on that flight. So even then, people were still having trouble dealing with a woman on space flight. And of course, we saw from her performance on that flight, women can do just as well as men.
Let me make we have that fabulous crew there, famous crew, STS-7. Marty and I have seen, heard Norm Taggart there in the background there, and John Fabian. Just speaks such praise of her at their talks out at the Space Center.
Oh, yeah.
To the fact that, of course, she was going to be invited on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and feeded all over, to Washington, D.C. and so forth. And when she got these invitations, it was just for her. And she says, I'm not coming without my crew. And she did not make a public appearance on behalf of the after this mission without the full crew being there. Maybe Crip couldn't come or, obligated or something like that for something, but she was very insistent that they were a team and that, not to be singled out for that. And of course, we have her handprints here in our museum.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Bob, with this interesting
at any rate,
conversation.
go ahead. And of course, you can see here she is appearing on the cover of news magazines because, that was the emphasis at that time. But during the flight, she did very well. And one of the things that I really appreciate is after she left the astronaut corps, she'd do appearances like you just referenced. And she'd say, everywhere I go, I meet girls and boys who want to be astronauts or explore space, or they love designing things and want to be engineers. I want to see these same stars in their eyes 10 years from now and know that they're on their way. Mm-hmm. And so that's why she started what's come to be known as the Sally Ride Science Center. and it emphasizes giving opportunities for young men, young women to study science, math, engineering, technology, and with that, encourage them to follow these paths, and especially that for young women to follow these non-traditional. I don't think it's as non-traditional now because we have for a generation now encouraged not just young men but young women to follow these paths that will take them into technical fields. And with technology a part of our lives so much of the time now, a lot of people are now seeing that as an opportunity. But it's because a lot of people, such as Sally Ride, looked at that and said, this is something we really need to emphasize with people, is encourage kids to follow their dreams and follow these different opportunities. Now, of course, in the time after her flight, Sally Ride's second flight was STS-41G in 1985, and she flew with Kathy Sullivan. And during that flight, Kathy Sullivan, you see here with Sally, became the first American woman to do a spacewalk. And now women doing spacewalks is something that happens all the time. And even now, I'm reading Katie Coleman's book, Sharing Space. And she has a chapter where she explains the fact that they put spacesuits on board the space station that are medium, large, and extra large. And she'd really be better suited for a small suit. But since there isn't a small one on there, she had to prove that she could do the spacewalk work wearing a medium suit, even though it was actually a little bit bigger than she would have needed. But she was able to conquer that and prove to everyone's satisfaction. And so with that, she was able to fly on the space station. And of course, this is a shot of Kathy Sullivan performing the first spacewalk by an American woman. Of course, after that, in the years to follow, there were a number of milestones. This is Mae Jemison, who is a medical doctor and chemical engineer. She became the first African American to fly in space. She flew on STS-47 in 1992. And then Ellen Ochoa has a doctorate in electrical engineering. She flew, this is her during STS-56 in 1993. She made 4 space shuttle flights. She was the first Hispanic woman to fly in space. And later on, she became the director of the Johnson Space Center in Houston. So you see, these women are very sharp. And then, of course, we've been talking about Eileen Collins. She became the first American woman to be commander of a space shuttle flight. She actually commanded 2 missions, including STS-114, which was the first flight after the Columbia accident. So that became a very crucial mission. She was next in line to command, so by golly, she did it and showed how outstanding that she is. And she's written an outstanding book about her life as a pilot in the Air Force, as well as a woman shuttle commander and a shuttle pilot. She was one of the first women pilot astronauts selected for the program. And she again proved they can do it just as well as anybody.
Those of you that come into Shuttle Fest again, she's coming in Thursday. She's going to be here the whole 3-day event.
Yeah.
And I've met her many times. She's just so down to earth and charming, and
oh, she is,
and loves talking to people. And I've got 60 of her books over there in the room next door there that she can autograph for you all. And she told me last night she will sign other items, but we're gonna have my astronaut wranglers there limiting that. So it's bad when people just inundate them with 5 more than 4 or 5 things, and astronauts are wary where these going to end up. If it's a book to my granddaughter, something like that, that's different. But people selling stuff on eBay is what they don't like. They want to personalize it. So very looking forward to another weekend with Eileen Collins, and she's really looking forward to meeting you. So if you've not got your ticket to Shuttle Fest, you need to do it in the next couple of days, as we're just have 21 left, Bob. So
that's right.
Glad that you got in there. So another amazing woman, of course.
Yes, Peggy Whitson. She has a doctorate in biochemistry from Rice University. She was the first woman commander on board the International Space Station. during Expedition 51 in 2016. And, it turned out she is a very strong-willed woman. When she was training in Russia, sometimes the Russians kind of push back. When they push back on her, she would push right back on them. So they learned to show very high respect for her, and certainly well deserved. And then next up is Pam
I
Melroy.
just wanted to mention Peggy's going to space again in May with the Axiom
That's right.
4 mission. She's already done an Axiom mission. This is our most experienced American in space with like 670 days in space. Then
Oh, yeah.
Sunny is second. Sunny Williams is second with about 605 days in space off the top of my head. But yeah, she's still going back up to space, and just an amazing career she's had.
Yep, and this is Pam Melroy, an Air Force colonel, also a pilot astronaut. She was the second woman astronaut who is a pilot astronaut, and she also served as a commander on STS-120 in 2007. And between 2021 and 2025, she was deputy administrator of NASA, second to former Congressman and Senator Bill Nelson, who served as administrator. She was his deputy, and certainly did an outstanding job helping lead NASA over the last several years.
She certainly did. Hope that she can still continue to have her influence on NASA.
Yep. And the most recent woman to go into space and add to the list was Nicole Ayers, who went up on Crew 10. She is the 102nd woman to go into space. She has a U.S. Air Force Academy degree in mathematics, a master's in computational and applied mathematics from Rice University, a major in the Air Force, and she served as an instructor pilot for T-38s and the F-22, a very highly competent pilot, and now serving on board the International Space Station.
And we'll put an asterisk behind your 102, which includes the suborbital Karmanauts. We like calling them. 82 women have orbited the Earth. And so if you got 102 there, that's another 20 that have been suborbital astronauts.
That's right.
So, so we like differentiating that a little bit, but she's going to have 5 months up there, and rookie, so good luck to her.
Now, one of the things I also wanted to talk about is by the time we got to the Space Shuttle program, there were many more women working in the Launch Control Center firing room, and that is a picture of Roberta Wyrick. Roberta currently works for Engineering Research and Consulting, a subcontractor to NASA's Test and Operations Support contractor, Jacobs, the prime contractor supporting the agency's Exploration Ground Systems program in launching the Artemis program, the Space Launch System rocket. And in fact, for the Artemis 1 launch, she was the primary test conductor for the Space Launch System rocket. Charlie Blackwell Thompson was sitting on the main console in the very back of the firing room. The next row had the test conductors, and Roberta was one of those.
Mm-hmm.
She went to the University of Central Florida, got a bachelor's degree in mathematics, and she started working for Rockwell in 1979. And then she started working with the ground launch sequencer in the firing room. And then that's the system that controls the last 45 minutes of a space shuttle launch. And then became an orbiter test conductor shortly after STS-1. In fact, her first time as an OTC, orbiter test conductor, was STS-2, the second flight. She transitioned to Lockheed Space Operations Company, the company I started out with. And then in 1996, when we all went to United Space Alliance, she transitioned to that. And when the Space Shuttle program was over, she left USA and went to work on the test and operations support contract for the Space Launch System. And so one of the things that she says is working in the firing room, she says, you're not going to find this anywhere else in the world. And it doesn't matter what launch it is. When you get to 9 minutes and counting, that's when my heart starts beating faster. Now, the next slide up will show that when you got to the Artemis program, there were quite a few women working in the firing room, and you can see NASA now realizes, and the contractors realize, women can do just as well as any of the men can, and so there are quite a few women working in the Launch Control Center firing room and some of the back rooms that support what's going on at the consoles in the Launch Control Center. And what Roberta said about that, we believe that many of the newer members are bringing a fresh outlook that's needed, and she was really looking forward to having them come on board.
Marty's got a comment from one of our viewers.
No, from me. The ground law sequencer takes control at T-minus 31 seconds, not 45 minutes. And Janine Pape, if you remember Janine, she's was the manager of the ground launch sequencer, and she wrote most of that software.
Okay.
Janine Pape's been on here. Yeah, we can't talk about everybody. Somebody mentioned that don't forget Dee O'Hara, the first nurse, and
Oh yeah.
there's all kinds that we'll catch up later on.
Oh yeah. Well, if we started naming some of the early ones, and like Dee O'Hara was a great one because when those Mercury astronauts would start taking things less than seriously, she knew just how to push back on them.
Uh-huh.
But she thought very much of all of them, and she was sweating when these guys were launching on those early Mercury flights. And so you have to think a lot of Dee O'Hara. She did a great job, and
She's still around us in her mid 80s out there attending things. Maybe we'll get her to Shuttle Fest when you're here. So tremendous. We're enjoying this conversation with Robert Granath. You're always bringing a great informative program for you stay curious watchers out there, like Gary Gerald, Chris Callie. Hey, Chris. Elena is watching. Tom Celentano, Connie McDaniel, Clay, Julie Clay, Bob Mayran, Carlton Bailey's watching.
Okay.
Doug Forrest, Dave Stengy, Steve Jokums, and we appreciate everybody.
Tom Usiak.
And Tommy Usiak also is watching, of course. So thank you all. Hope you enjoy Bob on here. If you've got a program that Bob would like to tackle, he's got his website again is Space Chronicle.
SpaceAgeChronicles.com.
SpaceAgeChronicle.com.
And type it in all one word.
Yep, and SpaceAgeChronicle.com. And he's going to bring more of those tales to us as he appears on Stay Curious. So a few more to go over there. All those beautiful women in the launch control room there working on the Artemis. That's Charlie Blackwell Thompson right there by the Artemis sign there. And here she is with Joanne.
Joanne Morgan, yeah. This was a great picture because when we launched the first mission to land on the moon, Joanne Morgan was the only woman in the firing room. When we launched Artemis 1, Charlie Blackwell Thompson was in charge. She was the launch director and had worked her way up. An amazing woman. I had a chance to get to know her in the lead up to Artemis 1. Charlie Blackwell Thompson has a degree in engineering from Clemson University, very soft-spoken, very easygoing, but she knows how to be in charge of that firing room. And I thought it was great having her there with Joanne Morgan because it's sort of like Joanne was there as the sole woman. We first started sending astronauts to the moon. Now that we're returning, Charlie Blackwell Thompson is the launch director who makes that final go-no decision to lift off. And so it really shows how we've come and how far we've come. You see her here at her console just prior to the launch of Artemis 1 back in November of 2022. And so when that one lifted off, she was the one giving the final go. She started.
That's your picture, Bob?
I'm sorry?
The launch there?
Oh, yeah, that's a NASA picture of the launch. But at any rate, the way she came up through the program is she started out working as a test director, as she served as the chief NASA test director for STS-130 and through the end of the program. And you see there's a picture there of her with Mike Leinbach. They're watching the STS-130 launch going up in 2005. And she served in that role for a number of the final space shuttle missions. And then once Mike Leinbach retired at the end of the shuttle program, she succeeded him, and she is now the launch director.
And Mike handpicked her. Talked to Mike many times about her. He just felt she was just absolutely the right person to do it, and you know he had a lot of weight in her being chosen there. Mike
Oh
launched
yeah,
the last 37 shuttles,
yeah.
and
Well,
a
one of the
great guy, and
things.
you'll see him at Shuttle Fest
Oh
this
yeah.
year.
Well, one of the things that she said that I really liked, she said, all those involved are well rehearsed for the countdown. Launch day is not a final exam. It's game day. Yeah. When you're getting ready to launch, this is the real thing. This is where you've got to make sure everything's right. And so she's the one overseeing it all, listening to what her team is saying and feedback. And, I've talked to some of those who have served in the firing room during the shuttle program, and they had full trust. If one of them said there's a problem, they stopped right there and they'd go check it out. And they were so well trained, so competent, and so cared about making sure everything was just right. Yeah, everybody who was in those roles knew how important the role was, and they were fully trusted by the launch directors. And if somebody said, we need to wait, they'd stop right where they were.
Hmm. Well, fascinating. Good way to end our March Women's Month with this program with Bob here and Charlie Blackwell Thompson. We've extended an invitation for her to be on here. She won't launch another rocket for over a year, so hopefully
Right.
she'll have a chance to get in here. It does look like Artemis 2 is going to go together. They've actually putting it together in the
That's
VAB,
right.
the core
Yeah.
stages and the a big week, I guess. The core stages and the SRBs were mated
That's
this
right.
week.
They stack the SRBs and put in the core stage and attach all that. So we're just waiting for the Orion spacecraft in the upper stage, and they'll be well on their way of getting ready to go.
Go for 300,000 miles away from the moon or something like that, and
Oh yeah,
wave at it and test out the systems. So, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. But Bob, thank you for giving us a thumbnail sketch of a dozen women that have made
yeah.
a difference in NASA.
Oh yeah.
Some that we know about and some that you've learned about today on Stay Curious. That's why we enjoy you coming to this podcast and guests like Bob here. So, anything else you'd like to talk about, say before we say goodbye to our friends?
That's about all I had prepared for today. I was like you, I was fascinated to see how someone starts out as an illustrator, then you have a lone engineer, and then you have the lone engineer in the firing room, and it eventually builds over the time that now when we launch astronauts to the moon, there'll be lots of women in the firing room, and there'll be women on board these flights going to the moon.
And they sometimes outperform the men in
That's
certain
right.
things. I think
And
men and
that's
women both have their strengths and not necessarily weaknesses. You don't have any weaknesses when you go to space, but no, it's quite a world we live in today. I know we want to put the first person of color and the first woman on the moon. On when we go back to the moon, but frankly, Bob, I don't care if two women are the most qualified.
yeah.
Let them go. But we
Oh yeah.
understand the image, like Sally Ride says, you can't be what you can't see, and we need to embrace that in all areas of our society, I think. So,
Yeah.
Marty, anything over there to button up on an excellent Stream Labs presentation today by you?
Nope, we're all button. Well, except for Mark Usiak just signed on.
Mark Usiak just signed on. He and I both in touch with another woman of the space age. We forget about the wives, but
Oh, yeah.
Marie Fullerton, who you may have had some dealings with, Gordon Fullerton's wife, we stay in touch with, and she did a Stay Curious with us one
Oh,
year.
very good.
She always comes to the Astronaut Hall of Fame in the end of May this year.
Oh, good.
So I was talking to her about a British BBC correspondent wants to do something about an Enterprise,
Ah,
in the great ALT program,
oh yeah,
approach and landing
ocean
test
landing test. Yeah.
that Gordon Fullerton and Fred Hayes and Truly and
Joe Engel.
Joe Engel helped pioneer another chapter of our important shuttle year history there. So fun to be in touch with these people occasionally.
Oh yeah.
And we don't want the wise to be forgotten too. So thanks a lot, Bob.
All right. Thanks for
Appreciate
having me
you.
on.
You look, that's a beautiful tie and shirt you
Oh,
got
yeah.
there. Maybe I'll rock a tie one day. Kind of got me looking a little underdressed here, the way you always come in here. And look over there. You see your buddies. We got things
yeah.
from Hugh Harris's estate
Ah, okay.
that his daughter brought in for
Mm.
us to use and share with you all out there. And Hugh also came in a suit and was fully prepared. So we really appreciate that. You're really feeling the good void that we feel that Hugh is doing, like doing programs like this, Bob. So appreciate you very much. As we do everybody else out there watching today, tomorrow, Thursday, we'll have Bert Dicht on here. He's the National Space Society's management director of their subscription to Ad Astra magazine and a lot more. So Bert will be telling you what he's been up to for the last month and some things in our future history here. And then Friday, we'll celebrate our 5th anniversary of Stay Curious, born out of that COVID-19 pandemic that nobody's thinking or missing 5 years ago. As it was really you look back, it was scary 5 years ago. We really didn't know what 5 years from now was going to look like in some ways when they shut down sports and meetings and gatherings and opera and theater and everything come to a screeching halt 5 years ago. So that's why we wanted to reach out to you, our nonprofit museum. And Marty and I started throwing this together, and we're still happy to be throwing it together with an awesome group of viewers out there that they're so intelligent, our group out there, and got such great questions and really enjoy programs like these that Bob Granath brought to us today. So thank you all for a wonderful day and week of Stay Curious. I'm Mark Marquette saying I can't wait to see you tomorrow to bridge the space between us. Thank you so much.